So we know how it works. We set an intention, we open up to our good, and then it flows into our life. Except when it doesn't. So the talk today is tough love, because it'd be nice if things always worked the way that we wanted them to work, that we could just say, this is what I want to have happen, and that'd be the way that things happen. That would put us in control, which would be very convenient as far as our ego minds are concerned. We've all heard the notion of tough love. That's where we love someone or something and we are attached to and committed to something bigger than the immediate request for that. And there are a couple of examples that come to mind. One is boot camp. So if somebody goes to boot camp, it is not going to be pleasant. And that's really not thought of as a loving environment. And what the recruits in boot camp need is to learn the things that they're being taught, because later those tools, those skills, those ideas are going to be very important in making them successful in what they're doing later in their career. The military has a saying that you're going to fight like you train. So the idea is tough love is let's get tough and let's make sure that there's an opportunity for something good to happen next. Another example of tough love is the phrase bad dog. So dogs do not like to be called bad dog. That's one of those, when they're paying attention at all. They love getting a good dog. They love getting their ears scratched and the love coming at them. But every once in a while, the dog is doing something that's inappropriate and possibly dangerous, but definitely counterproductive to the life that they really want to be leading. In which case, no is very important. And if, as a dog owner, I have to pull out a bad dog, which I try not to do whenever I can avoid it, then I'll do that, because that will provide a framework for love to unfold in the future without being limited by the behaviors that are going on. So when we love someone, we can give them what they want, or we can give them what we understand they need. And perhaps it is that which we are able or willing to give. And as we're looking at the situation and hearing the request and hearing the desire, to be able to accommodate, to be able to step forward in a way that's going to not just do what they think needs to be done right now, but to do something that's going to be helpful in the big picture. And that brings me to the notion of suffering. And Buddhists are all about alleviating suffering, and they understand that suffering is something that happens in human experience. And they're not huge fans of suffering, but they do understand that it's part of the deal. And I got a great description of suffering. Suffering is when we want things to be different than the way we're experiencing them. When we want something to be different than the way they are, that brings up suffering. Because there's a delta, there's a difference, there's a space between the experience that we'd like to be having and the experience that we are having. And the Christianity talks about that too in Matthew chapter 6 verse 8, and we're doing a class now on learning to do healing like Jesus, and this is right from the Sermon on the Mount in the lead up to the Lord's Prayer. Jesus says, your Father knows what you have need of even before you ask him. Your Father knows what you have need of even before you ask. So if you ask for something that's inappropriate, the Father knows that that's not going to be a good thing for you, and the answer seems to be no. I had somebody who said to me this week, I'm very clear about what I want, and I'm very clear in expressing that in my prayers, and I keep running into roadblocks. One after another, there's a roadblock that's keeping me from getting to the good that I'm seeking, and I keep on opening to it, I keep on praying, God keeps on saying no. What's going on? And my observation was, maybe this is not the right road. Maybe getting a yes to this and getting what you want is not going to get you to what is going to be the most helpful. Maybe the way that love shows up is not in this specific, perhaps short-sighted way. There is a bigger picture that's unfolding. There could be additional folks that are involved. And that gets really close to the God in the sky telling us, no, we can't have something. But remember that this is all in consciousness. This is all in consciousness. If there is something that we want that's contrary to what's in our highest good, then it's our own consciousness that's going to be limiting it. Yeah, I can say that I want to have that, but if I'm not ready to embody it, if that's not going to be uplifting for me and for the people around me, then it's liable to not work. And we can complain about that. We can rail against God. We can talk about how unfair it is that we're not getting what we want, that our prayers aren't being answered. We can stomp our feet and be upset. We can also remember what Emma Curtis Hopkins told us. This too is good, this too is God, this too is for me now, and I demand to see the blessing in it. When stuff is showing up that we don't like, perhaps there is something for us to learn about that. The tough love is the learning that we get to do as we transcend that. Is this a universe of rewards and punishments? No, because that implies that there's some external force deciding what's good for us and what's not good for us. Saying, you get a reward and you get a punishment. And that's not the way it works. There are consequences. For everything we're creating, there is the experience of that which we have created. Sometimes it's exactly what we intended. And sometimes there are unintended consequences. Sometimes the way that the story unfolds is not what we had in mind. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes there are roadblocks or bumps along the way, and we get to re-engage and consider something different. I don't know if you guys remember Ed Koch. He was the mayor of New York City, a very, very popular mayor. And after he left office, he was doing a talk show on one of the local radio stations. And people would routinely call up and say, "Oh, Mr. Mayor, you're so wonderful. I love you, and you should still be the mayor." And Ed Koch, who had a great sense of humor, would say, "No, no, 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 no. The people have spoken, and now the people must be punished." And he was term limited, but in a lot of ways, that's the indication of where we are. So if you want something that you can't have, if you want things to be different than the way that they are, you're setting yourself up for suffering, setting yourself up for disappointment. There's a wonderful piece by Araya Mountain Dreamer called The Invitation. And this stuff keeps on coming up. So every once in a while we read The Invitation, and I'm going to do that now. She writes, "It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me to know how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you've been opened by life's betrayals, or become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain." Now this kind of sounds pretty and inspiring, and it also sounds kind of tough-lovey. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful or to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself, if you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul, if you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. These are deep ideas. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not pretty every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you'll stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. When tough love shows up in our lives, it's sometimes exactly what we needed. Damn it. And the guidance that's there, especially when the roadblocks show up, especially when what we thought should be so simple doesn't happen, can wind up being a gift. One of the things that I love doing is weddings, and I have a process where I get together with couples and we plan out their wedding ceremony and then fine-tune the things that are going to happen and make sure that everybody's going to be at the correct end of the aisle and so forth. As we get closer and closer, there's fine-tuning of the details. So I've been working with a couple for about for 4 or 5 months now, and we had a meeting scheduled to talk about putting the finishing touches on their wedding ceremony. And they've been engaged for a while, but they were all distraught because there's been some stuff coming up between the two of them. They're finding out things about their relationship and the way they interact with each other because she doesn't like confrontation. So he's been doing some things that have bothered her, but rather than say something about it, she's swept them under the rug. And as she described to me, at this point, the rug is pretty lumpy. There's a lot of stuff under there, and it's become uncomfortable. So in the last couple of months, they've been talking about it, and there is all of the pent-up irritation and frustration and all of the difficulties and the panicky, oh my gosh, we're scheduled to get married in a few months, now what do we do? Is that love unfolding? Is that the way love shows up? Well, we go back to the basics of the teaching. There's only love. There is one divine power and presence, one infinite source of everything. And it shares its very substance and energy and intelligence as everything that exists in the universe. Everything is that one taking its own particular form. And that sharing, that level of sharing of self is love. So everything is love. And sometimes it looks just like love. And sometimes it does not. Sometimes the idea of the love that we were looking for, that warm, squishy, holding hands, sitting on the couch together, snuggling kind of love that we had in mind is not what's showing up. And that's very frustrating and can be very upsetting and can lead us to suffer, because that is definitely an example of wanting things to be different than the way that they are. And still, in all of it, there's love unfolding. There's a blessing at hand. Because part of the discussion that the bride and the groom and I had together was, it is much better to know this now before you walk down the aisle. It is much better to know this now before you sell both of your houses and get a house together. It is much better to know that if you are incompatible, that you can address that incompatibility and make room for it in your relationship, whether that means moving on or adjusting the relationship. And it's also possible that what they're learning is that the pattern that has been in place for a long time of not being confrontational, sweeping it under the rug, ignoring, not paying attention, isn't working for them anymore. We can look at this as a roadblock and an impediment and something that's bad, or we can look at this as an invitation to step up the game, to allow love to come into the experience even more richly and more fully. Is it possible for two people who have been doing that to resolve it, to get past that? Trick question. It's an infinite universe. Everything is possible. And yes, that's possible too. It has happened. It involves the process of letting go of the preconceived notions, stopping doing the things that have been causing trouble in our relationship and our activities previously, opening up to a new possibility, and perhaps following different guidance. And that's part of getting past suffering. When we're wanting things to be different than the way that we've been experiencing them, we can do things differently. We can change what we're desiring. We can make another adjustment and bring ourselves into that place of harmony and alignment. At some point, I will be able to tell you the outcome of the story of the person who's been running into roadblocks. At some point, I will be able to tell you the outcome of the story of the couple that's running into lumps of stuff that's been swept under the rug. I can't do that right now because it has not unfolded yet. But what I get to do, what each of us gets to do when something like that comes along, is to set the intention, not for what we want to have happen. I kind of notice that doesn't help. Sometimes when I say, this is what I want to have happen, the universe gives me something different. And it's because what I wanted to have happen wasn't serving me or the situation. So the more abstract I can be with that, once this comes about, this is how I want to feel. Once these roadblocks are removed and I am able to move joyously through this path of life, how do I feel? What are the experiences that I'm having then? The less specific we get, the more flexibility there is for the infinite to create that goodness for us. Or for us to discover, I made a detour, I'm not on the right road, and that's what the roadblocks are. Because this road is leading me towards a cliff, and if I insist on continuing along, things are just going to get worse. There's a phrase that we had when I was scuba diving a lot. If you're diving and you have a problem at 30 feet, it's not going to get any better if you go to 60 feet. So that is a reminder that if we're involved in something and it's not working the way we want it to be working, maybe it's time to open to a different possibility, to consider that what we think we want and what we actually want, the difference between what we think we need and what we actually need, the difference between what we think is our highest and best and what is actually our highest and best. There might be a difference there. And we let go of our attachment to thinking we already knew it, then there's the possibility for something new showing up. So that's the invitation, and that's the gift now. When it shows up looking like tough love, looking like the answer that you're looking for is not the one that you're getting, consider that magical process of surrender. Let go of it being the way that you thought it was going to be, and see how it can be instead. See what happens when love shows up and that tough love turns into warm squishies. See what's possible. Invite something even better. And let go of whatever you thought was going to be the best before. Because you deserve it. Because you are, in fact, a bright light of that divine love shining in a way that is uniquely you. Let your light shine. So it is.